To Warrior. I'm Chris. Very glad you're here. This is the next episode. Wait till you hear this expert. This is about networking, mobile ad hoc networking, and maintaining a dismounted connectedness with software programmable radio for forces. It's Persistent Systems, and it's Colonel John Patrick. He is the Business Development Director, Vice President of both Army and SOCOM, and they have some cutting-edge technologies that are now in partnership with the Army and the Pentagon to bring new generations of AI-enabled networking to the military. Let's welcome Colonel Patrick. Thanks for being here. It's nice to talk to you. Tell us about your innovations and how it's helping the military.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you. First, thank you so much for having us. We're very excited of our product line and how we are currently influencing next generation command and control, the prototype unit at 4th Infantry Division. So just a little background on the company. Persistent Systems, we were founded in 2007. By two PhD students out of Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Herb Rubens, Dr. Dave Homer. But Persistent Systems itself is a commercial leader in networking, and we specialize in providing secure global communication fabric that modern operations require today. Our solution is based on something called the wave relay algorithm, and that's what our two founders produced back in 2007. This algorithm operates within what you just said, the MANET, the Mobile Ad Hoc Network, and provides a robust solution for transmitting video, voice, and data in the most congested or contested environments to the Department of War, law enforcement, international partners, or commercial users. Our technology, the flagship being the MPU-5, which radio and networking device, it's designed to empower the warfighter with real-time situational awareness and seamless connectivity across any domain, whether it's land, sea, or air. By supporting the key modernization efforts like NGC2 for the Army, we are ensuring that our forces have that data-driven decision-making tools in their hands at the time they need it to really provide them that competitive advantage.
Wow, you've inspired a whole number of questions, sir, and I don't know where to begin, but you recall my days when I showed up at the NIE, because it seems really interesting now to be following what the military is doing with networking, because the longstanding vision or the dream was to create this kind of seamless joint interconnectivity with the right protocols that was multi-domain. And that was the goal. And that's kind of long happening. But gosh, I remember years ago at the NIE with software programmable radio IP packets traveling through those high bandwidth waveforms. They literally put a rifleman radio on a shadow drone to get that multi-domain line of sight. How is line of sight and multi-domain obstacles being addressed? And then tell us a little bit about the hardware and the kinds of scenarios this might impact.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You bring back memories of even my time as a tanker, and even what 4th ID is doing. The 4th Infantry Division has original SINGARs in their tanks, right? So we've talked about network evolution and modernization for a long time, and I think right now we're actually seeing it being done at 4th Infantry Division. So to talk about the multi-domain piece, I think we need to maybe talk a little bit about what a MANET is and versus a mesh type of network. If you think of a mesh network, your home router, where there's infrastructure there. If the router itself fails, the entire mesh goes down and your home is left without internet, right? Translate that to a MANET. In a MANET, every single node, radio, MPU-5, piece of it is its own router, right? So you have constant understanding of where you are in the routing scheme as you are compared to everyone else. And that's the power of what a MANET does, right? And that's how we can get into things regardless of land, sea, or air. If I can see you, or if I can communicate through RF, through line of sight, or if I can communicate with you through layer 3, so any WAN vector, think Starlink, up to a cloud instance. Now I can link multiple MANET bubbles together, and we can have a clear communication path and really support APACE, if you're familiar with the APACE solution of primary and backup comms relays to make sure that communication actually happens. So that's what we provide. Our solution and the wave relay algorithm takes that data packet that you're talking about and things on the high bandwidth side, and we intelligently route that to the most efficient way throughout the node structures. And since I know where you are, and you know where I am at all times, I could skip you, I could go somewhere else, I could jump over you, because it doesn't make sense from a network bandwidth perspective for me to go line of sight to line of sight to line of sight. That's the power of MANET.
Well, that's excellent. So you don't, not only do you not need that fixed infrastructure, but with each node operating as a router, you can create that almost self-healing connectivity. I like what you mentioned about efficiency. How do you maximize the efficiency? Because bandwidth length or size to a degree has been a big factor in what you can send, how fast you can send it. There was a real premium placed on high bandwidth waveforms. How are these
Absolutely.
software programmable packets essentially transmitting in that respect?
Sure, that's a great question. I think we start running into things like bandwidth, like spectrum allocation and spectrum availability at the unit level. Legacy way of doing things, I think, at least when I was in this company or this battalion would get 5 megahertz of spectrum, and then this other company would get another 5 megahertz of spectrum, and we each run our own keys, right? And anytime we task organize, we'd have to blend those keys together, where a radio operator would have to come to my radio and program it in, right? And then, at some point, you in essence run out of spectrum when you get to the division level. What our solution does is, because we broadcast, actually, because we send data, broadcast is the wrong word. We send data only to the user who needs it, and not broadcasting where everyone gets the data. We can intelligently put that data where it needs to go without overwhelming the entire network and limiting the amount of bandwidth traveling through it. The other power of the Benet is, instead of spectrum allocations by company, we can put an entire brigade on the same 20 megahertz channel at maximum scalability and route inside with the same key, so that when you task organize, it's just like your cell phone. When you go between town to town, right, and you're going from place to place and jumping between a T-Mobile network, you're expecting it to just efficiently work. That's what a Benet does. I don't need to come to you and reprogram your radio. You're on the same key, 20 megahertz for the brigade. It just works. And that's the biggest compliment you want. So no one to complain about the network.
That's excellent. I really like how you talked about the algorithm, because that's the AI enabled part, correct? To maximize that efficiency, where you get the optimal path, if you will. And can it then, as part of that, deconflict the spectrum? I've come across some technologies where AI systems are able to recognize and then deconflict the spectrum to recognize where the most optimal path might be for transport.
So I would say, for us in particular on the MQ5, I wouldn't call it AI on the algorithm. It's the way the coding in the algorithm works, right? There is no AI decision making within our platform itself. However, there are AI tools that ride on top of our platform because of our capability and our processing power that can do those things to make it to augment the network as well.
Tracking. Well, I wanted to ask about the hardware footprint. But first, when it comes to multi-domain, you talked about line of sight, and there's, I'm sure in many cases, an aerial node or a gateway that can connect surface or air to mobile land troops to a degree. What about the gateways or the protocols to help enable that interoperability? Because from what I understand, there can be incompatibility in some cases. So how do you get that joint interoperability? Because that was really the dream of Jitters, right? We all remember Jitters. You're kind of bringing Jitters to life.
Yeah, no, I think, the Army now calls the unified network, and how are we going to achieve this, right? And I think what we see, and I see at a 4th Infantry Division with the prototype, is there are multiple vendors within the transport layer. We just happen to be the prime vendor at the battalion below, but we also have to interact and integrate with tactical 5G, with Starlink, with Silvus, right, as backhaul, right? So all of that has to be able to function together. And what the expectation of the Army is through this prototyping efforts. And if you're familiar, we've been at Fort Carson for the last 8 months working through these connections to make sure that all the data, regardless of the transport type, is integrated and flowing, right? So those connections, those API hooks, all those pieces are actively being worked every day by engineers at Fort Carson to make sure that PCC-6 is effective and successful. It's a lot of work, a lot of companies together.
Yeah, absolutely. The 2 last questions. One is the hardware footprint. One of the things that's been an area of real incremental progress has been reducing the hardware footprint. So you have the processing power without needing the same larger form factor. How are you? Sounds like you're very involved in that. How are you accomplishing that? Then I have to ask you one last question.
Sure. So our whole concept as a company is, how do you reduce burden, whether that's cognitive burden or physical burden, right? And then taking that approach, when you look operationally at a unit, what does that look like? So there's several ways that we approach it. One is something called ROIP, radio over IP, where we can integrate with legacy radios and then take that analog data, convert it to digital, and now that asset, whatever the asset is, green radio is on the network. So if you're thinking an infantryman, they're carrying a man pack or they're carrying legacy green radios, they can actually leave that at the FOB or the COP or wherever their base is, because that asset, as long as it's integrated with an MPU-5, and we have cables and technology to do that, that asset is now on the network. And if it's in the network and in the bubble, it can be employed. So you no longer have to carry it on any type of excursion or walk or anything, right? So we're reducing load even from that perspective operationally for units. In terms of what's happening at 4th Infantry Division, they're concentrating on mostly is the fire side, one of the most probably complicated pieces of the mission is the fire side, right? Whether it's air layer deconfliction, what round to choose, the logistics side, a piece of that. So legacy 777s are being used out there, the 777 howitzer out there with 8th ATADs, and now a system called APS on top of that, which is a new app that's coming in from the Army. We have replaced the communication systems on the guns from the forward observer to the gun to the FDC, the fire direction control system and officer. Taking off OE254s, taking off legacy antennas, and really use an MPU-5 to integrate. So much so that the first at Ivy Sting, we had visitors say, you've just reduced the EW footprint of the guns because there's no signature there anymore, or the signature has been lessened so much that operationally we've just increased survivability as well, right? So the impact of technology like this, I think, is still being understood and felt tactically and operationally, and from a TTP perspective at the unit level. But it's pretty amazing, right? When and I wouldn't say it's not that we don't have an signature, is that when you're in a Manet, you're a needle that looks like in a stack of needles. You look exactly the same. So if you think about Ukraine and what was going on in command and control vehicles being taken out there because of their signature, for us, you look the same as everyone else, right? So you're a needle in a stack of needles. The enemy can't distinguish what that signature is because it all is part of the Manet and inside. So reducing footprint, reducing EW signature, reducing load, the cognitive burden on these are very, very easy. Our user courses and training out there at 4ID and the soldier reception and feedback we've gotten has been great. And General Ellis just said, the commander of 4th Infantry Division said, I'm no longer fighting the network, I'm fighting with the network, right? Total difference, I think, of what we've both experienced in the past.
I love what you said about survivability and hardening, and also the signature. I learned a bit ago from some industry innovators this idea of having a pencil beam kind of EW signal instead of a more wide area signature, so that you're less detectable. You give away your position almost immediately. How is this being hardened so that it can't be jammed? Are there things like frequency hopping? Perhaps one's cluttered and there might be another one that's a better route.
That's a great question, and I think those are active things that the Army is doing at Ivy Sting 4. DDIL, the degraded environment piece, was brought in. EW was brought into that operation. For us in particular, we have something called IRD, and IRD is our interference resiliency and defense software that's integrated into our MPU-5. It's turned on all the time, right? The user doesn't even know it's there. And what's that doing? That's looking at any attacks that are coming in. It's looking at noise floor comparisons and trying to bring everything up into the noise floor so that we can still operate. We do that through agreements with the Army, where we're getting threat updates multiple times a year and integrating that into our license. We have a perpetual license, so it doesn't cost the user anything. It just comes with firmware updates as we get the information. That's always turned on in the back, and that's always then to what the question you just asked is, we are always fighting the incoming threat. But the power of the Manet is that you could jam this radio in the Manet in the top left, but the bubble is so large, we're just going to jump right by it and the information is going to keep going, right? The more radios, the more nodes in the Manet bubble, the more hardened and strengthened that actual comms flow is going to be.
I'm totally tracking. Excellent, excellent. Well, gosh, I keep trying to end and you keep inspiring more questions. I have one last one, which is, it makes me think of fighter jets, actually. And I know you'll put this in context for us, because it used to be that the F-35 and the F-22 couldn't have the two-way back and forth, right? You have one's link 16, another
That's
one
correct.
has a different kind of data link. How do you enable that joint interoperability if one transport layer is perhaps at odds with or not the same as another? What kinds of gateways and protocols do you use to create that long-standing vision, that joint synergy?
So that's a great question, right? CJAD C2, how do we get to it from a military perspective? Um, and I will be honest, Fred, I don't have an answer to that on this, but what I will tell you is that even with 4th Infantry Division, we are just now using the MANET and experimenting with PAE aviation to understand how we could get the MANET inside AH-64s, UH-60s, Chinooks, right? And into the UAS side, the unmanned aerial vehicle side, and then how to keep that data flowing into the overarching 4th Infantry Division network, right? So that's ongoing experimentation. I think we're seeing really positive things coming out of it, and I'm excited to get to some of the solutions you were just talking about, because that is a very hard problem to solve.
Well, as a former tanker, you would really see the value, the tactical advantage of being able to network like this. And this truly leads me to my last point, which is you're a paradox, because we all remember FCS. How many years ago was that? And the vision of a system of systems. And the irony is, while that was canceled, overly ambitious, perhaps ran into all of this developmental problems we all heard about. But that vision, that core concept is alive and potentially coming to life now through the kinds of things that you're doing. So it's sort of this zeitgeist, or the kind of resurrected spirit of FCS is almost kind of lingering. Not to say it wasn't a problem, but I look at what you're accomplishing now, and then I see the longstanding vision.
Chris, that is an excellent point. I was an APM for Future Combat Systems a long time ago. One of my assignments in the Acquisition Corps. So I was in it when it was happening, and understood how big it was. And I think the parallels that you're making are exactly right. But I do know that we have learned some lessons from what happened in FCS and how much we bit off to where we are now. And I think the technology iterations that have occurred and that we have access to, and not only that, really the shift to commercial technology and some of our partners on the commercial side that can develop faster than the government could at the time, are making this version of FCS, right? And I say that lightly because there are differences, but the parallels are definitely there, have a chance to be much more successful.
Roger that. Expertise brings to mind this idea of, the Army over the years has always gotten hammered for acquisition and canceled programs, but you're living proof, or the Army's current success is living proof, that all of these programs like CPOF or Tiger or WIN-T, those were not lost, because the lessons learned, the self-healing elements of it, the multi-domain networking of it, the on-the-move command and control, that's all what's kind of coming to life. So you have these ways in which innovations and developmental efforts are still continuing to inform and help engender current success.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is every time I'm out at 4ID and I see the collaboration and how fast industry is moving to solve problems together in lockstep with the Army. It reminds me of how hard it was for us to do that at FCS, or even programmatically, to your point, how far the acquisition and the Army community has come together to pivot to something like this. It's truly amazing when we can make code changes in a day to fix a thread issue that's happening on the ground to support soldiers there. That would never have happened when I was in the acquisition side, not at scale anyway, and not with 37 other industry partners all jammed into a room trying to make this thing work, right? It's very impressive. I've never seen the Army tackle it this way to get to success. I think it's really exciting.
It's a very big deal when you think of Project Convergence, Firestorm, and sensor to shooter pairing, and the pace and the security of information flow, which calls to mind. So, Colonel, what happens next as this starts to implement and gets developed? One must think down the developmental trajectory, right? How might it look? What might it look like in an operational scenario a few years from now? Where does it stand in the developmental trajectory?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think what we know as industry now is that all roads lead through PCC 6 right now, which will be at the National Training Center in July for 4th Infantry Division. Post that, in that August, September timeframe, the Army will really take a hard look at the lessons learned, right? And in conjunction, I think, if you didn't know, 25th ID is doing a parallel effort out in Hawaii with Lockheed Martin as their integrator on Raft and 4ID with Anduril for their Lattice effort, right? So those things are ongoing at the same time. And I think they're going to be very important in then positioning the Army and providing the answers to what is next. For us, what we see as next is, and what we have heard is multiple division fieldings in the out years, 2 divisions at a time, maybe a light, maybe a heavy, maybe a mix, who knows? But incrementally fielding this capability, and maybe not the entire stack, but certain pieces of the stack, because we all know that there is a limit to this called the budget, right? As things go along, and replacing entire networks or replacing entire operating systems is difficult. So I think there's a big piece for the Army to figure out how that works. We're excited to be part of it. We are scaled and postured to be part of it, and ready to produce and deliver whatever the Army's requirements for us in the future. I think open the eyes of the Army from our product line is a dongle that attaches to the side of our MPU-5. Show you an MPU-5, right? It goes into a port here on the side, and it's called the PT-5. It's the Personal Transport 5. We just released it last year, and what that does is it has a 5G cellular out to provide a link up to layer 3 if you need it, the cloud or whatever. But it also provides a Wi-Fi bubble that can be operated off the MPU-5. That's expandable based on power. So if you think of a squad leader, which is really where this is being fielded all the way down to a squad leader, has this. Soldiers are now carrying EUDs, the end user devices that are Wi-Fi connected through our PT-5 dongle. So you have a Wi-Fi bubble at the squad leader level where soldiers, they're not carrying radios, but they're carrying EUDs. So they're able to receive data at the tactical edge through that Wi-Fi capability. But they also have RF line of sight from in the bubble, right, from the MNA, from the MPU-5, right, as well as the ability to use host nation cellular or potentially tactical 5G as another connection to really harden the pace and the pace of our network itself. So that's another big thing. I think in PCC5, General Ellis saw that we had augmented reality goggles on tank commanders that were Wi-Fi'd into the PT-5, and it was just everyone's like, hey, there's no cords, there's no cables. This is amazing. This is what the Army wants to go to. So that's another big piece that we're bringing into this network, is that ability to have that collapsible, expandable Wi-Fi bubble and the 5G out off of the radio itself.
Former Army tanker of all things understands the tactical impact of these technological breakthroughs. Now with persistent systems, we want to thank you for the kind of expertise our listeners have come to expect. You ought to give a course and be a professor for all of us. That was amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on your technology. We'll keep tracking it.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate yours. Thank you so much.